of the Soviet Union, that whole period when he was there, and that era in Russian history, and indeed that end, how does that play into the, I guess, the sort of the wounded Russian nationalism we see today in the post-Soviet era? How much do these ideas drive Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think that, Vladimir Putin, we keep on saying he's rewriting history, but he's not really. What he's doing is reviving a version of Russian history, which a lot of Russians were brought up with, and which goes back a very long time. And I think that the roots of the crisis today, you can trace back, if you want to go back that far, 1,000 years to when Russia first came into
Hmm.
existence.
I mean, tell us a bit about how we can trace them back 1,000 years.
Well, I think there are various things about Russia today that are important. One is that it is part of it's a Christian country, it's a European country, but it's an Orthodox country. I mean, Russians believe that Roman Catholics are not only heretical, but the Roman Catholics are out to get them, to destroy their church, and they believe that since more or less since Russia adopted Byzantine Christianity, which was in the 9th century, and they believe it today. I mean, I always quote an encounter we had with an old lady in a Russian village in the 90s who said to us, we were obviously foreigners, she said, "Are you Christians or are you some sort of Catholics?" That's a very deep feeling that they have. So that's one aspect of it. I think another aspect of it is that Russia is a place with no natural frontiers. I mean, it can expand and contract like an amoeba. And that means that it's always been invaded by foreigners, by Mongols, by Turks, by Poles, by Germans, by Frenchmen, by Lithuanians, by Swedes. But of course, it's done the same in reverse. It's invaded all its neighbors at one time or another. So where the frontiers lie is a matter of fundamental dispute between
Mm.
Russian neighbors. Um,
Yeah, would you say it does? I mean, that idea of Russia as being sort of constantly beleaguered and despised by those outside, as you were saying, the view they had of how they were thought of by Catholics and Christians outside Russia. Does Vladimir Putin believe this? Does he have that, what one might call, paranoia, or is he just using Russian history as a
well,
propaganda tool?
I believe that on the whole, leaders in all countries believe the same historical myths about their countries that their people do. I think he believes them.
Mm.
He's also, of course, weaponized them. He's exploiting them. But I don't. And the question of the question of what he believes and what he doesn't believe is a sort of philosophical or even metaphysical question. We don't know in the end. But my belief is that he genuinely believes that stuff.
Yeah, okay, and he really does believe that the world as it is poses a threat to Russia and always will. You were the British ambassador to Moscow in what 1908 to 1992. Could you foresee trouble ahead even then between Russia and Ukraine as the Soviet Union split up?
I think the answer is yes. In the sense that one thing I did do, so I know what I thought at the time. Doesn't mean to say I was right, but I wrote it down in a diary. And before the Berlin Wall came down, I wrote down that we may be witnessing the breakup of the last European empire, and if it goes, it will be Ukraine that triggered it.
Hmm.
So that was September 1989. When the Soviet Union was falling apart, right at the end, when it was clear that it was going to break up in the autumn of 91, all my Russian friends, including the most anti-communist ones, the most liberal-minded ones, were absolutely appalled at the idea that Ukraine would split from Russia because they had never thought of it as anything other than part of the same historical, emotional, geographical tradition.
Mm.
And one of my friends, who was a close advisor of Gorbachev and man, a real liberal I greatly admired, said that if Yeltsin, who was about to take over from Gorbachev, finds that the Ukrainians are making trouble, for example, over frontiers or over Crimea, he will have no option but to use force.
Mhm.
In January, that's January 92, so Yeltsin was already in power. I expressed the view, but I didn't send it in a telegram. I only wrote it down in my diary and said it on the phone, that we really need to bear in mind the possibility that Ukraine and Russia will find themselves at war. And I was talking to the Foreign Secretary's office, and they said, are you serious? And I said, well, I'm exaggerating for the sake of effect, but you really do need to bear that in your mind. So it was always there, this conflict, is what I'm saying.
And the idea in Russia that Ukraine should not exist as an independent country makes no sense as an independent country. Does that have deep historical roots as well?
Well, it comes basically from what I've been saying. I mean, both Russia and Ukraine and Belarus for that matter, are on the territories that were part of what's called Kiev and Rus, which was the state based on Kiev, which lasted from the 9th century until it was destroyed by the Mongols. And both the Russians and the Ukrainians claim that they are the authentic, perhaps the only authentic inheritors of that state. And you can argue about that until you're blue in the face. There is no final answer to it, but there's justification for the claims of both. You could formulate an argument. So that's the first thing. The second thing, of course, when Putin told President Bush, that Ukraine doesn't exist as a state, that's of course rubbish, because Europe is full of states that didn't exist before 1914 and many that didn't exist before 1939. So how long a state has existed is no argument one way or the other. I mean, all of us didn't exist at one point or another, and we've all created something or other which we now claim as eternal states.
Mm.
I mean, just look at our own country at the moment. What are we talking about when we talk about England, the United Kingdom, Britain, Scotland? It's very confusing.
It's in constant flux. How uncertain is, I mean, Russia as is today, how uncertain is Russia's future? Is there any fear in Russia of further breakup? And how much does that concern Putin, if there is?
Well, one can imagine a breakup. You can imagine bits breaking away. And when the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was talk of Siberia setting up an independent republic. And of course, the Chechens tried to break away. There was even talk of Tatarstan breaking away, where the Tatars, the descendants of the Mongols, where they now live. But Tatarstan is in the middle of the country. I mean, I myself don't see how it could break up. And if it tried to secede, I think the Russians would send in the tanks. I don't think and that's post-Putin as well. I think that any Russian government would be likely to use force. Siberia, I think, is a fantasy. I don't think that's going to break away, although Siberia, in my view, is a burden on the Russian political system because it makes the country too big to govern in a simple and efficient way. So I don't actually think it will break up, but I bet Putin, Chechnya is obviously part of the argument. Chechnya, and he was very brutal about suppressing the rebellion there. I think he must worry a bit.
Mm. I mean, yeah, okay, look, before I let you go, I guess I have to ask, how do you see the current conflict ending, and when do you see it ending?
I make a great profession these days of not making predictions. I think, we know actually surprisingly little about the conflict because the Ukrainian military security is incredibly good. What we do know is that the Russians didn't have the walkover they expected, that they've made the usual mistake of great powers with lots of weapons of thinking they can overwhelm a small enemy. And then they discover that the enemy is more highly motivated than they are, and the enemy has no option but to go on fighting, whereas you can always go home, as everybody did in Afghanistan, Iraq, or wherever, Vietnam for that matter. So I think the Ukrainians obviously have many things on their side and a lot of vulnerabilities as well. If you ask me this question again after the winter has come and gone, I may be in a better position to make a prediction.